community advocate. And we understand that this is what makes the Saturday Preschool a part of the lifeboat of North Philadelphia, which is not a responsibility taken lightly. We would also like to thank all who have donated to this event. And I would like to draw attention to the rest of the organizers of the symposium who developed this event, including the exhibition, showcasing information and photos and pamphlets of Henry Winston, of Derek's art that we have displayed in the church. And who also helped develop the general ideological framework of the symposium. For Saturday, we'll be having food, so we did want to thank the chef, Mamie, for cooking for us. And she cooks throughout the week at the church. And the soup kitchen is a project initiated during Father Paul Washington's service, and that was soup kitchen really was able to continue throughout the following terms of his pastoral leadership. And today it also serves as a way for the people in this neighborhood to still know this church. That's part of the history, But I did want to say a few words about why we are commencing the symposium and to share information about the Saturday Preschool for philosophy and Black liberation in particular. The Saturday Preschool is a 10-year-old school consisting of people bonded by their commitment to the political education of the total population. The Saturday Preschool was a project started by Dr. Anthony Montero out of Temple University. The class that Dr. Montero was teaching then, over time changed and grew into the free school that others who are not familiar with the Saturday Preschool will meet today. Each individual of the free school was able to grow and mature as human beings because of the Saturday Preschool. Each person who came to the free school was connected to another member already a part of the free school. So the free school develops in numbers like roots of a tree, and the tree can only grow if there are strong roots, which for our purpose are always going to be tied to the people. The people involved in the free school come from a variety of backgrounds of race, religion, and parts of the world. Our beliefs and ideology guide how we see the world and act towards other human beings. The example that we have of Martin Luther King and his single garment of destiny is not a principle of the past, but alive in our minds. Our commitment towards each other in the free school is grounded in the optimism and spirit of revolutionary possibilities. We believe it is possible to actually transform society from war and poverty to peace and prosperity of the people. This belief holds true in our hearts because we were transformed by the political education we receive in free school. It is only through transformative and honest political education that one is able to be a better human being and help change society. So this symposium is a part of the political education of the people around us and of ourselves. We are transformed by the work leading up to this project, but this project is not in of itself. Throughout this year alone, members of the free school commenced other programs, our most recent being that of the celebration and commemoration of the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party of China's birth, or on the hope for brotherhood between India and China. And we have many upcoming events, such as the 10th anniversary of the Saturday Preschool. The work of the Saturday Preschool for philosophy and Black liberation helps to politically engage and understand this moment, which includes being able to have the courage to face the central political questions of our time to figure out how to understand the honest and revolutionary political line to assert and help guide the impulse of the people in their interests. Further, the free school serves to develop a political left that the people deserve, one which will struggle and stand for positive peace. Political education and ideological clarity thus help pave the way for the people towards peace and unity. And this is why we have a symposium on Henry Winston, starting with the point of a strategy for freedom, which is what we entitle our event. Now, I would like to read the call that we wrote for this event, entitled Henry Winston, His Vision for Freedom and Hope in Our Time, a call. Henry Winston was born in 1911 in Mississippi, in the very shadow of the defeat of Black Reconstruction. The lives of Black folk at that time were not that different than during chattel slavery. They had no rights, worked land they could not own, and never rose beyond crushing debt and deep poverty. The working mass of Black folk ultimately constituted a Black proletariat, super exploited and racially oppressed. Many of Winston's relatives and neighbors had been slaves. His mother headed his family, which included 2 sisters, and escaping Mississippi, the family moved to Kansas City, Missouri. The poverty and racial oppression of Mississippi followed them, forcing Winston to drop out of school and seek work by going on the road. Amid the collapse of the world capitalist economy and the start of the Great Depression in the 1930s, Winston found himself part of a generation of young people who were a stranded population, uneducated, unemployed, homeless, hungry, and without futures. They were a vast army of the unemployed. They traveled in freight cars, lived in hobo camps on the side of railroad tracks. Of this vast army, many gave up. Some turned to crime and hopelessness. Winston found among youth like himself the unemployed movement and the unemployed councils that believed in fighting back rather than giving up. Here he met members of the Young Communist League and the Communist Party. He began to study politics, philosophy, and economics. He came to realize that there were few, if any, individual answers for the mass of impoverished and destitute youth, and that struggle was their sole hope. The life lessons Winston learned in his early life would be a compass, helping him navigate contradictions and obstacles for the rest of his life. Winston joined the Young Communist League, rising quickly to become its national organizational secretary. He studied Marxist-Leninism in the Soviet Union at the Lenin School. Here, he met communists and revolutionaries from around the world. He saw that the revolutionary process was a world process, and the class struggle in the US was part of a vaster struggle that included the anti-colonial struggles in Africa, India, and China. He learned that the Black struggle was linked to the movements of the darker peoples around the world. More than a decade before Winston arrived at the Lenin School, figures like Chu Dai, Deng Xiaoping, and Zhou Enlai, leaders of the Chinese Revolution, Ho Chi Minh of Vietnam, as well as revolutionaries from Haiti, South Africa, and Egypt had attended. In the throes of economic collapse, Winston concluded that to prevent another such crisis, and to save the young generation from complete ruin. The system of capitalism had to be replaced by socialism. He believed reforms, like many of those enacted by the Roosevelt administration, were significant but could not solve the general and intensifying crisis of capitalism. He saw the fight as two-sided, for radical democratic, political, and economic reforms under capitalism and for socialism. This was not an academic matter to be achieved. An alliance of the multiracial working class with the Black freedom struggle was necessary. For him, the working class cannot effectively fight for itself and its class interests if it could not overcome all the elements of ruling class ideology which infected its ranks. First and foremost, white supremacy. In this regard, he saw the rise of Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO, and the organizing into unions of unorganized workers in the automobile, steel, mining, shipping, electrical, and transportation, and other industries, based on the principle of Black and white unite and fight as an important step forward. But the working class must fight all instances of racist terror against Black workers and Black people generally. In the fight against racism, Winston joined the struggle for the freedom of the Scottsboro Boys, the 9 Black youth charged with raping 2 white girls on a freight train, crimes they did not commit. The fight was to save them from being executed and ultimately to win their freedom. This became an international campaign in the fight against US racism and for the rights of Black folk. They were saved from execution, but spent long years in prison. For the rest of his life, Winston fought for the freedom of political prisoners, highlighted by his leading the struggle to free Angela Davis. During this time, Winston joined the Council on African Affairs, headed by the revolutionary and anti-colonialist Paul Robeson, connecting, as he would throughout his life, Black freedom with African independence. Winston rose quickly in the Communist Party and was elected in the Central Committee. The rise of fascism as a world movement and the threat to democracy and socialism found Winston becoming a fighter against fascism in Europe and in the US. He supported the democratic forces in Spain and defended the Soviet Union when it was attacked by Hitler. After Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, he joined the US Navy, which at that time was a completely racist and segregated institution, like all the armed forces. Winston, like the Communist Party and most progressives, would be tested after the end of World War II. The US rose to be the dominant economic and military power in the world, committed to restoring the global capitalist system, including a new form of colonialism in Africa and Asia. This included a Cold War with the Soviet Union, the buildup of nuclear weapons, war in Korea, and attacks upon democratic and civil rights at home. At the same time, a movement from within the Communist Party arose to turn it into an association of leftists, and essentially the left wing of the Democratic Party, or something like the Democratic Socialists of America today, rather than a unique revolutionary and independent political party. Winston and others successfully resisted this. However, figures like W.E.B. Du Bois Paul Robeson, and Winston were soon targeted by the US government as foreign agents because of their opposition to nuclear weapons and colonialism, especially in Africa. Winston was indicted, convicted, and sentenced to serve 6 years in federal prison. He lost his sight in prison due to medical neglect. In prison, Winston restudies W.E. Du Bois's writings on race, democracy, and Pan-Africanism. The study would define his theoretical practice for the rest of his life. His search for the essence of the U.S. revolutionary process and its connections to the world's anti-colonial and revolutionary struggles drew him deeper into Du Bois's writings. He must have certainly been drawn to the chapter in Black Reconstruction in America on the dictatorship of the Black proletariat in Mississippi, the state of his birth. Du Bois's groundbreaking conceptualized that the African slaves were a proletariat, further opened scientific possibilities for Winston's thinking. Certainly, like Du Bois, Winston viewed the colonialization and neo-colonialization of Africa as central to the enormous profits of the West and its financial and industrial corporation, and to the stability of the capitalist world system. He viewed Pan-Africanism in Du Bois's articulation as part of the world struggle against imperialism. Upon his release from prison, Winston threw himself completely into the struggle, rising to be the chairman of the Communist Party and as a respected figure in the World Communist Movement. He viewed the World Communist Movement as the leading force for peace and democracy on a world scale. He sought to link the World Communist Movement to the broader global struggles, drawing him to the World Peace Council and its leader, Ramesh Chandra. Winston viewed the special position of the Black working class in the overall fight for democracy, peace, and socialism as the central, leading to his formulation of the centrality of the Black freedom movement. The concept of centrality meant that the Black freedom movement is part and parcel of every progressive and radical current of the struggle in the United States. For Winston, rather than a separate struggle, the Black freedom movement was a strategic component of the revolutionary and democratic processes in the US. For him, it stood alongside the class struggle in importance to understanding the essence of the revolutionary process in the US. For this reason, Winston fought ideologically against all efforts to diminish the historic role of Black people in the US or the African anti-colonial struggle. He was committed to building the Black left within the Black movement and within the general struggle in the US. As for Africa, he was particularly concerned with communist parties and left and radical movements in Africa. For instance, he had particularly close ties to the communist parties of the Sudan and South Africa. He also had close ties to the African National Congress of South Africa and revolutionary democratic parties in Guinea, the People's Republic of the Congo, and Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau. He was particularly close to the Cuban Revolution and its paramount leader, Fidel Castro. Henry Winston's vision is anchored to his efforts to scientifically understand the unique essence of the revolutionary process in the United States, its substance, and in multiple forms. It was his view that such an understanding could ground a practice of unity and struggle against the monopoly capitalist system. This effort found him joining communist theory to Du Boisian theory. These theoretical discoveries ultimately constitute a new synthesis, which advances a practice of unity and struggle in our time. Henry Winston, as a thinker, is an important contributor to the struggles for peace, democracy, and socialism. In 2 books, Strategy for a Black Agenda and Race, Class, and Black Liberation, and many essays and speeches, we witness him working out this new theoretical synthesis. The Saturday Free School organizes this 3-day symposium to honor and study the vision of Henry Winston and to further develop that vision. In this moment of deep crisis for the youth and people, the struggle for ideological clarity is critical. There is, moreover, a pressing need for what Martin Luther King called a radical revolution of values, to shift the thinking of the youth and people from a thing-oriented and materialist way of viewing the world to a people and humanity-centered way of thinking. Side by side with new values, people's culture, including music, poetry, novels, dance, film, and videos, painting, and all forms of culture has to be created. What Henry Winston fought to achieve is now passed on to a new generation. A generation that can spare no effort to know the world in order that it must be changed. We are optimistic that the youth and people of the United States can achieve this lofty goal of radically transforming our society. And that would be the end of that call. I did see Dr. Alfred. If Dr. Parker wants to have a couple words from the church after his
Wasn't that beautiful?
That was really good. You know, Dr. Montero, what can I say? I have a friend I went to college with. Her name is Adalja. We went to Hampton University. And all she says is, I heard him on TV. I heard him, no, on radio, right? I heard him on radio. I heard him on radio. So we hear you on radio. Okay. So I am Evelyn Partridge, and on behalf of the faithful few that worship here on Sunday morning, that believe that this is truly the church that lives the gospel. And I think tonight and some of the other programs is certainly an example of that, because it's about justice. So I welcome you, enjoy, maybe a little chilly, but you know, that's the advocate. So just enjoy. And we thank you all for being here. And I would certainly be remiss if I did not say, service is at 10 o'clock or 10:30 on Sunday morning. So enjoy, thank you. And I think we just need to give Saturday free school. Doing the work. And I mean, Dr. Montero, his vision is just endless. He truly has a vision. And we thank you. We thank you. And we thank you all. Come again. Thank you.
the rest of the program, we're gonna watch a video that we had edited of an interview with Henry Winston speaking. And following that, there'll be a conversation about Winston. So I'd like to invite Anita to kind of introduce the video. Thank you.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to this event honoring the life of Henry Winston. I'm Emil Palmier. I'm a member of the Saturday Preschool, and I was honored with the task of editing this priceless interview, I would say, of Henry Winston. It comes, I believe, from the Tenement Library archives, and you can find it on video if you'd like to see the whole thing, about 4 hours long. My goal in editing this video was to try and pull out Winston's thoughts and his ideas, and also how he came to those ideas, how they developed throughout his life. I also tried as best I could. I mean, it was a very, in many ways, it was a difficult interview because much of his life was a real struggle. But I tried as best as I could to bring out the laughter and the smile and the joy that Winston, the human being that Henry Winston was. And so one thing I should also mention is that it was a 4 hour long interview, and I edited it down to 45 minutes. So some of the transitions are a little abrupt, as well as the interviewers seem to interrupt Winston pretty regularly, which is a bit frustrating. So some of the cuts that you see in some of the transitions might not be completely clear of the context. And I think what I want us to try to focus on is really the ideas that he's trying to get us to think about. And so I don't want to talk for too long. I think I'd like to see the interview. So. That's just cool.
I was born in Harrisburg, Mississippi, the year 1911, April 2nd. I went to what was then known as the Little White Schoolhouse behind the railroad track in the Jim Crow community, which was a lot of all Black people during those days. And I went across the railroad track in Harrisburg, Mississippi, and went through the in the third ward and went through the sixth grade. My father was a sawmill worker. He was the breadwinner in the family. The weekly wage was pitifully low. And in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, the picture to children of this day, and I'm certain for generations yet to come, is one in which they will be asking, Mama, Papa, how come? Black people was segregated behind the railroad track. The railroad track was the dividing line established during the period of child slavery. And the dividing line during that day continued to exist in 1911, the period in which I was born. And what did it mean to be beyond the railroad track, behind it? It meant that Black people, economically, was at the bottom of the social ladder. Adults, as well as the young, had no opportunities beyond the ghetto. In this segregated community dominated by Jim Crow. It meant that politically, they had no right of equal citizenship, beginning with the right to vote. This was a denial based upon poll tax, based upon grandfather clauses, based upon terror, legal, extra-legal, and to think of Black people running for office was unthinkable, was impossible, because there were party lines, Democrat, Republican, and Blacks were excluded from either. But also the possibilities of advancement, becoming men and women of dignity, holding their head high, living and working, operating on the basis of economic, political, social equality. This too was unthinkable. But in addition to everything else, cotton, which existed in the whole of the South, we called it in those days the Solid South. In those days, we talked about Dixiecratism. In those days, to guarantee that white supremacy ruled, white supremacy of the type of the billboard. This was reinforced by KKK terror, reinforced by lynchings, and the use of governmental authority to make Blacks dependent upon the goodwill of the present day slave owners. When I had to go to the third, fourth, fifth grade, on the other side of the railroad track, there were white boys living in a white community, a community that we had to go through to get to school, would always meet us with sticks, stone, bricks, and we had to fight our way through. And if one thought that the law would come to your support. They had another thing coming. Nothing of the kind. This was a daily experience of Black children who had to go to school in the Third Ward in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Or you can take an uncle of mine who was lynched because he dared to speak up for the right to receive, should I say, adequate wages. When I came along, the prevailing thought, the prevailing consciousness that the Black people would never in the United States achieve equality. This is the way the things are. This is the thing that will be. There were varying opinions. For example, the prevailing thought that if, say, through education, that in the by and by, someday, gradually, Blacks would reach a stage where some, if only a few, would be integrated into the larger society. And perhaps someday, through education, white people too would become educated, and they would see the necessity for being integrated. The thought that all of us are God's children, but that this would require education. The question was never put, education for what? Education for whom? Education for what class? These were not discussable questions. In the 20s, when I came on, I thought that human nature couldn't be changed when, in fact, it could be changed. That human nature was class conditioned, was a class concept with its basis in class. I was to learn this later. And you'll be surprised, but I wanted always to become a lawyer. My mother wanted me to become a preacher. My aunt wanted me to become a bookseller. I did not see beyond that. Earning a living within the framework of things as they existed was my outlook on in that period. When the economic crisis struck in 1929, I was immediately thrown out of school in my sophomore year. I attempted to wash dishes at night and go to school. I found that to be physically impossible. I had to give up one or the other. I gave up the school, you see. But my father also was thrown out of a job. He worked at the steel mill in Kansas City. He had brought the whole family up, from Hattiesburg. But then, like millions of other unemployed throughout the country, the problem of staying alive was a very, very big issue. Lynching. If I recall correctly, during that whole period, some 6,000 lynchings had occurred through the South. In Marysville, Missouri, not too far from Kansas City, a black man was burned. He was strapped down, burnt on top of a schoolhouse. The question did arise, is there not an answer to all of these? So there used to be a daily gathering of many unemployed in Preschool Park in Kansas City, Missouri. The unemployed gathered there and naturally debates on every kind of question. Iconoclastic science, questions of the Republican Party and its betrayal, questions of the Democratic Party, its base being the Solid South, the Dixiecrats. Big questions about should there be silence when men and women were being evicted from their homes because they could not pay rent. What to do about welfare? Why should people be dependent upon charity, philanthropy? Why shouldn't there be a certain city responsibility, state responsibility, federal responsibility? How and what should be done to promote economic, political, social equality? It was in the course of these discussions, debates, that one day I saw a white man and a black man together selling the Daily Worker. This was my first introduction to communism and the Communist Party. Black man, white man, working together, and each of them saying that lynching should be abolished, that there should be welfare relief for the unemployed without discrimination. Black and white, and especially white, protesting the frame-up of the Start for a Boy, Angela Brown. How could this be? The Democratic Party was really white. In fact, their base was precisely that of the Solid South, and they promoted it, supported policies which could not but help feed lynching. The Republican Party had long since forgotten its role in the abolition of child slavery and did nothing on it. But even more, it was Hoover who was the President of the United States when these things hit. I concluded that this was the hand to shake. The fact that this black and white person was selling the Daily Worker, calling for organized public opinion to act, to put an end to lynchings, to support movements for unity and action of black and white, to help meet all of the economic problems which flows from a criminal policy of those who rule the big moneyed interest, the racism, and the political organizations which help to sustain and promote it. I've never heard this before. I never heard that it was possible to change things. This was an answer to the question that you can't change human nature. This was a tonic. It was a voice representing the fundamental interests of the people, bringing hope and encouragement. What these communists said and did was to be proven to be absolutely sound, as it worked to affect unity of the people, unity of struggle, the organization of the most advanced sectors around this kind of program for action. This attracted me very much. And so it was not long after that that I began in Kansas City to attend forums in which all kinds of topical subjects was thoughtfully presented. And I saw that these discussions led to action, that deeds match words, and whether it be on the front of civil rights, on the front of the economic and social needs of the people, the comments were there. I joined the comments because of the fact that they beat you becomes a fact that is quickly known. The proper conclusion is drawn that you're dealing here with a force determined, as they put it in those days, quote unquote, to keep black in that place. This meant second class system. And it was part of the larger struggle. You quickly learned this, that this is not only anti-black, it is anti-white as well. I learned from it. And that is the thing that among others, that strengthened me. But better men than I have experienced much, much more. So this was a question of paying dues, which enable one to defend democracy, to extend democracy, to satisfy the needs of the people. This was a contribution to America. And all of these meetings was designed to keep me from making this contribution. Well, in the YCL, I think that this was a thing of the, by this I mean that black members, white members worked together, fought together as equals. The democratic discussions that took place were in fact democratic, and that young blacks, together with young whites, would discuss policy from its beginning and conclude that policy. And you knew by experience that it was black and white. And it was based upon a struggle against a white ruling class. I was to learn later that without unity, it was inconceivable that one group were exploited could succeed without unity with another group which was exploited, oppressed as a nationally oppressed people, as a race. All of these things emerge, the commonness of our task, togetherness. And if you mean by this that white chauvinism did not exist, I would say, and I believe that it's necessary to understand, that we work not in a vacuum, that outside influences express themselves from within, and even white young people who are so advanced in their thinking, who are trying to separate themselves from ideas and habits of the old and of the class that rule things, is bound to be affected one degree or another by influences which come from a class, and a class of which and for which it is not these white youth. And one of the most beautiful examples, it seems to me, of how to find. And one of the things which inspires us, that there are white men and women who battle bigotry. But you see, they go through the same process of learning as white folks do, you know, the problem of class liberation. One can even go further, the elimination of class exploitation. Now, it does turn out to be true that in the Soviet Union, they were the first in the world to solve the national question. And to solve the national question means, first of all, to remove the basis for national question. This means taking the profits away from those who profit from inequality of people. But this was not Stalin's idea. It was Lenin, and Stalin learned. this from Lenin. Remove profit from those who maintain national and colonial oppression, provides the basis for solving questions relating to equality and the correctness of this basic concept of Marxism-Leninism has proven to be true. Even today, when you look at the Soviet Union, the Russians, quite unlike the period before 1917, exist on a plane of equality with the 14 other Union republics in the Soviet Union. But I would say that people who develop this kind of thinking do so out of considerations that has aim other than the elimination of the system of capitalism, does not see the struggle for democracy and its relationship to a higher life for the people. Therefore, they develop theories about something coming from, quote unquote, Russia not being applicable to the United States. Now, of course, you have a different situation in Russia of those days than you had in the United States during those days. But the problem of oppression, whether it exists somewhere or Oshkosh, is the same. Is oppressed by one class or the other. Now, it's a line of argument which says we should not be concerned with geometry because it's not not applicable to America because geometry comes from the Greeks. It has that much sense. Or that radium should not be used in the United States because this came from Anatolia, from France. And so, you're dealing with question of principle. And the approach to freedom of women, of children, is universal. It has a universal truth. Now, when one applies that truth, they have to take into account the specific conditions in each country. Now, I hasten to say that, in my opinion, this was a slogan which, for that period, was justified and correct. And we drink from the fountain of knowledge from whatever source and use it for social advantage. This is the case in natural science. Why shouldn't it be the case in social science? So I think that people in debate should deal with substance and not form. I think the greatest of all mistakes was when the party for a brief period abandoned the concept of Marxism-Leninism, an abandonment which meant giving up the class struggle in the United States. I think that this was an era which was bound to have negative consequences on the party. An era which did not helped to advance the cause of struggle for the working class and for the equality struggle of Black people in the United States, to defeat fascism, to stop on a world scale the Rome, Berlin, Tokyo acts. At home, to defeat the efforts of the America Firsters, to defeat the National Association of Manufacturers, to defeat the sit-down of big capital a la Henry Ford, and to defeat the Ku Klux Klan and other reactionary forces in the country. There was a common interest existing between all of these class forces who had as a single aim to defeat fascism, not to retreat a single inch from maintaining what masses have achieved in blood for this country. Naturally, under such circumstances, there was an activization of all democratic forces, the communists who sincerely devote themselves to the struggle for democracy and seeing socialism only in relationship to it, was activized as well. There's not a group in the country which did not grow as a result of fighting for democracy. And people felt freedom to give their true feelings to the communists who they saw on the fine line and into fascism. Now, after the victory has been achieved, then these same mixed class forces find themselves in a situation where there takes place a differentiation among them. Some want to stand still, some wish to go back, and many of them all want communists not to profit from that victory to which they gave so much. It was Karl Marx during the Civil War even who brought to this country, first of all, but also to the world, that labor in the white skin can never be free so long as labor in the black and brown. This is an axiom in the heart. Now, this does not mean that the party in the struggle against white short did not make mistakes. I, being a member of the National Board of National Labor Congress, worked with others to project for the first time in the United Nations a petition, a statement in regards to discrimination against blacks. That's the first time this has ever happened. This was soon to be followed by a statement of William B. Du Bois. This was later to be followed by William L. Patterson's recharge genocide, and so forth. We were struggling because the problems of blacks was connected with the problems of blacks in Africa as well. But in it, there was a substitution of what is decisive now. The maximum use of the educational method, the ideological struggle, throwing that overboard and making primary administrative measure of expulsion. I don't think that needs to depart. Fascism was around the corner. It was a period in which there was not only a danger to democracy in general, but a danger to the Communist Party in particular. For example, 135 leaders of the Communist Party had already been indicted under the Smith Act. These comrades remember that during the Palmer raids, that whole period, that 10,000 communists had been rounded up and put in jail. And they see this as a possibility, as a growing thing. The mistaken concept that you need the perfect man, you need the perfect woman, you need to do things in rapid fire order. You need people to do on the basis of command. You fail to see the need for the educational process. We don't have time for it. The dangers upon us. But this is a very, very big mistake. As I said, the principles for which we were fighting, I would gladly fight for those principles today. I think those principles were correct. And they were at that time a reaction to the waves common to that period to fight for democracy. It was quite clear that, look, Galileo had to face in his day. Jefferson Adams had to face reaction in their day. Harriet Tubman, Garrison had to fight in that day. And they were fighting for principle of moving society forward. This is what we were doing. The fact that reaction proved at that stage to be stronger than we does not mean that reaction will always be stronger than we. That was the case with the British in 76. It was the case with the Jeffersons, the slaveocracy. 61 and 64. Well, I thought it was necessary. And I will not say that at a particular moment there was not fear. But fear should not prevent me from doing what I think to be right, what I think would serve the cause of the people. When you read that hound dogs are after you, and you recall that this was the lie of black people during slavery, after slavery, out of which grew the old spiritual, wade in the water chilling, because it is said that the hound dog will go to the water's edge. This is how you can escape chattel slavery. People supporting it, have done it right way. And to repeat, when you are active in the fight to defend the interests of people, act in ways that give patriotism meaning, you are able to survive. You know the class enemy. You know that they're racist. You know that they are beastly. Well, you have a choice to be a coward or continue to fight for the people, knowing what the end may be. This was how I looked. I think it was a struggle for the correct life, how to effect it. And the best way to do that is to preserve the integrity of the Communist Party. I did not agree with those who took a revisionist line, the essence of which was to give up the class struggle, which was to give up the party. I thought this was inimical to the interest of the class, to the interest of the nation. Even present-day events show that those who took this path were wrong. They took a path toward individualism. They put individual interests above the interests of the common man, the common woman. You see, there are those who feel that they wasted 20 years because they are now wallowing in riches, material riches. Why should I struggle for others? Better struggle for myself. Me. Well, it was not this that I joined the Communist Party. I understood there would be ups and downs, but that the right path will be found. I believe that path has been found. I believe that the Communist Party is here to stay. As long as there working class, you'll have the Communist Party. You cannot destroy the working class. You cannot destroy the Communist Party. Whatever the strategy is, by setting up organizations with the name communist in it, whether by attempted infiltration of the Communist Party, this is part of the struggle. It would not be successful. So you can see, I was very happy to come out of prison and find a Communist Party with a present and with a future. Because I don't think that social problems of the country can be solved without a communist. Event after event shows that when the Communist Party has been an integral part of movements such as the organization of them organized, the mass production, that is when democracy has been more secure. That is when the people has improved their living standards more. This is true. To destroy the Communist Party, if they could succeed, would result in destroying democracy.
Thank you. Now we're going to move on to a discussion about Winston. So I'd like to invite Winston Blunt. Yeah. Okay. First, before the conversation, Doctor's going to have a couple words about Winston.
Thank you very much, Serafina. And I'd like to express my real appreciation to Serafina and Jake and Emil and all of those in the W.E.B. Du Bois James Baldwin Reading Group for initiating this. And they did initiate it. And they got me involved. So this has been a really great beginning. I'd just like to say a few words. First of all, what you saw here is the way Henry Winston was. I had the great honor of working directly under him for many years. Maybe about 15 years. And I would meet with him almost on a daily basis. And I would say that the bulk of the political knowledge and organizational and ideological knowledge that I have comes almost directly from Henry Winston. What you saw was a man from the South of the United States, a Black Southerner from the deep South, from Mississippi. And he never put on airs or never tried to act like anything other than a man from the American South, a son of those who had been enslaved in the United States. And so he brought a unique insight to theories of revolutionary struggle, of the class struggle. I don't think I'm saying anything unusual for people here, that you have often, or we often hear people talk about the class struggle as though it were a slogan. Most of the people who talk like this have learned about the class struggle in college or in a graduate seminar, not in practice. So when you listen to Winston speak, in fact, we call him Winnie, when you listen to him speak, and he spoke, and he was just like you saw him here. That's just the way he was. He was always referring back, as he said here, to the common man and the common woman. He was always talking about children, and he was always talking about the necessity of uniting the people against a common oppressor. Now, you can imagine how difficult it is for somebody like myself to take seriously all of the loudmouths, so-called activists who are wedded to identity politics. As Winston said, it is the me, not the we, that defines their practice. Winston always began with the we. The other thing, I think it comes across here, that he did not learn these things in a textbook. His life verified what the textbook said. And in fact, he added to what the textbooks were saying. In fact, that's why he wrote books and pamphlets and gave speeches and so on. I just want to say a couple of things. Mamie, the woman who cooks in the kitchen here, I had invited her to be my special guest. She didn't make it. But I wanted her to be my special guest because she asked Serafina a very important question. She said, Serafina, why is the free school giving a symposium of 3 days about a Black man that very few people know about these days, and who was a member and leader of the Communist Party? And I thought that was a very important question. In fact, a journalist that was interviewing Serafina asked the same question. And clearly, it is a question that we should answer. It's not a hostile question. In today's world, very few people, since the end of the Soviet Union and the undermining of the world movement, the world communist movement, many people don't even know what a communist party is, what communist parties did, and certainly they have no idea of why a person like Henry Winston should be studied, why he should be studied. Well, I think by just listening to this interview, and Emil did a wonderful job of editing it, because the interviewer was at some points very hostile to Winston. And Winston, as you can see, is a very dignified man all the time, very polite, very generous, just like you saw him here, very serious, very thoughtful. Very thoughtful. I was going to say something, let me just say this. And, you know, Du Boisian in always going back to chattel slavery and the anti-slavery struggle, and what the anti-slavery struggle teaches the working class as a whole. And thus he would come forward with the concept of the centrality of the Black freedom movement, which is another way of saying, what do Black people have to teach the nation, and what does their struggle and their history have to teach white people, Asian people, Hispanic people of all races and religions? And his idea was that Black people had an enormous amount to teach. But then he also had this notion that Black people must learn. We must learn from the world struggle, the anti-colonial struggle, the achievement of socialism in the Soviet Union and China, Cuba. He was very interested in African independence. I couldn't remember a time when he did not, in his speeches before the Central Committee or before the conventions of the Communist Party, would not talk about African independence, and in particular, before it became a popular thing, the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. He saw the anti-colonial struggle as part and parcel of the world revolutionary process, and in particular, the anti-colonial struggle in Africa, which was then and has continued to be a particular target of world imperialism up to this day. But he saw these two things, the anti-slavery struggle, the anti-colonial struggle, and the achievement of socialism. So he said, Black people have a lot to learn from the world experience, and we still do. Now, let me just end on this. Clearly, Winston did not foresee the collapse of the Soviet Union. One of the great reactionary events of all of human history, because it threw everything back. He could not have foreseen the impact of the collapse of the Soviet Union upon the world communist movement, to which he was very dedicated to. And hence, the ascendancy of anti-democratic forces worldwide, including in our country. Maybe in the conversation with Serafina and Catherine, I can draw out some of this. I just want to end on this, that what Winston's life proved, and you can see it here, is that being a revolutionary is not being cold and anti-human. Being a revolutionary is loving the people, not as a slogan, but as a practice, as a way of life. I don't know whether you could notice it or could tell. Winston at this time is blind. He was blinded in prison. He was having terrible headaches. He, told the prison authorities, but they didn't take it seriously, and so he went blind. But I never saw any bitterness. He seldom talked about his own suffering. He would say upon getting out of prison, they've taken my sight, they haven't taken my vision. And as you could see, he's always talking about the questions of uniting the people against a common oppressor. So I'll end there. Maybe we'll bring up some of the ideological questions that we confront today, and maybe how Henry Winston would have addressed them. So. Yeah, we all have this. For those of you who don't know, this is Catherine Blunt, longtime activist, trade unionist, anti-apartheid, pro-independence for African countries, anti-war. I mean, Catherine, pro-Palestinian, every area of struggle that you, anti-gentrification, as well as being a school teacher, and former principal. And I'm not exaggerating. She did all of these things, which is extraordinary. But I'll turn it over to Serafina. So how will we proceed over this?
I guess to start, and as you mentioned that, Winston comes from the South. What other influences was Winston thinking about? Like in the interview, he was speaking of Galileo, and those kind of examples that he thought were moral as well. But I did want to ask about his relationship with Du Bois. Was there like a real connection, or was it just like what he read?
No, I joined the Communist Party in 1970, and I, like so many young men and women of that time, were impatient, felt that Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement did not move fast enough, that I was even at one point, and Catherine can tell you this, I was an advocate of urban guerrilla warfare. I went to jail for that too. But yeah, let's not talk about that too loud. But we are live streaming, but it's a part of the public record. But anyway, and when I came into the Communist Party, the thing that was so impressive to me were all of these Black men and women, like Winston and others, who were experienced, who knew the world, who thought strategically, not just for the immediate thing or not trying to be a celebrity, like we see so much today. But one of the things that I've always heard them say, and this was William L. Patterson, Louise Thompson Patterson, James Jackson, Esther Cooper Jackson, you can look these names up. And Winston, as they would say, Dr. Du Bois, Dr. Du Bois. All the time, Dr. Du Bois. We say Du Bois, they would say Dr. Du Bois. Dr. Du Bois said this, Dr. Du Bois. And they had been literally mentored by him. He was at least a generation older than they. But he was this towering intellectual figure. And I believe that Winston, when he was in prison especially, restudied Du Bois. He obviously, you can hear from the way he talks, he understood the book Black Reconstruction in America. The other person that I continue to hear them talk about, Dr. King. Dr. King. I was what, 22, 23 years old. And so I thought I knew it all. Who doesn't think they know it all at 23? You show me somebody that doesn't. You know it all. You're going to change the world. And in one big, uprising of the people, although you didn't have that many relationships with the people. But, and they kept saying, Dr. King, and Dr. Du Bois. And those were the two that I heard the most. And yeah, okay, I'll stop there. Don't stop there. Okay, let Kat go.
So I want you to tell us what you think the impact Henry Winston had on the Communist Party of the United States.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is a big question, Catherine. And by the way, you can see without a thinker like him, one who thinks strategically and is calm and deliberate and scientific, you can see how chaotic things get without an anchorage. And that's the problem right now. We don't have that. But what Winston, and this was in the call that Serafina read so beautifully, what is the uniquely US essence of the world revolutionary process? Because if you just take the European paradigm, it's class. The societies are pretty much clearly divided along social economic class lines. But in the United States, you have class, but then you have this huge issue of an oppressed people, of Black people, whose oppression is rooted in enslavement and in the initial accumulation of wealth upon which capitalism in this country was built. So as Black folk, and Winston always talked about this, you could not just reduce everything to class. You had to see national oppression, how the Black proletariat was linked to the white working class, how the white working class was linked to the Black proletariat, and so on and so forth. I think that Winston, among an entire cadre of African American thinkers and activists throughout the party, revolutionized what it meant to be a communist. And as Serafina read in the call, and I think it's a fact, I don't know how often it's been said, that this synthesis that Winston is attempting to carry out, you see it in his books and his writings and so on, of Du Boisian theory and communist theory, of Lenin and Du Bois, frankly. Very, very few, if any, people did that. I'm of the opinion that few communists ever fully understood Winston's writing. Everybody loved Henry Winston. How could you not? Such a generous and humble man, by the way. Humble and decent. I know I wish Mamie were here. I was going to say the reason we have to study Henry Winston is because we have to see what decency looks like in a political leader. This is not your Democratic Party hack. This is not your, really a trade union opportunist. This is not your loud mouth that just found out about racism activist. You know, this is a man who is very stable, very anchored, very humble, very generous, takes every question. This questionnaire, this guy asking the question, if you had seen him, he was not respectful of Henry Winston, but Winston was respectful of him. So I think as Shirley Graham Du Bois' second wife said about him, his day is marching on. I think the same is the case with Henry Winston. We have not yet finished with Henry Winston. We are still learning Henry Winston. And if I could say something, if you don't mind. You know, I worked very closely with Serafina on this project. And I could see, the reason I'm convinced that he still has so much to teach and we have so much to learn from him, I could see the way she reacted and responded to his thinking, to his ideas, and such. So I think he has a great deal to say to the younger generation at this time of crisis.
Another question I was thinking about, I know we mentioned Winston being in the Soviet Union, but is that the only place that he traveled? And if so, like, what were the details?
You know, he traveled to a lot of places. I mean, I think he was in Vietnam. I know there's a clip, a very brief clip of him having dinner with Kim Il-sung, the leader of North Korea. I know, but he was throughout Africa. He spent a lot of time in the Sudan because he was very close to the Sudanese Communist Party, other parts of Africa and Europe. Yeah, he traveled quite a bit. And, but he was always interested. He wasn't traveling so he could have a sightseeing vacation. And, you know, a lot of us traveled and did that, I have to tell you, but he was not one of them. He was always traveling to learn, to have discussions with other leaders. For example, you know, we mentioned Ramesh Chandra. Again, his name is not well known now. You know, one of the great peace leaders of the second part of the 20th century, but nobody knows his name these days. But I can recall Ramesh Chandra, who is from India and was the president of the World Peace Council, coming to the Communist Party headquarters regularly, meeting with Henry Winston, and these two men saw the world in the same way, pretty much, very similarly. Can I just tell one other story about his getting out of prison? I think Joan, you can verify, this is Joan Kozlov, member of the Communist Party. One of my mentors and teachers from back in the days. But in the call, we said when Winston was sentenced to 6 years, no, it was 8 years in Terre Haute. I think it was 8, but he served 7, yes. He was sentenced to 8. And Terre Haute in Indiana. And the story I get is that the Cuban government had one of the people who was involved in the Bay of Pigs. They captured him, or a couple of them, and they wanted, the US government and the CIA wanted this man, or these men. And what the Cuban government and Fidel Castro insisted upon, or the exchange, would be Henry Winston for them. So it was international solidarity that led to him getting out. He would go to the Soviet Union, and there's a story about a young Russian girl who offered to give up her eyes if it could give him sight. So he lived in this solidarity. He was well loved in the world communist movement, believe me, well respected. One of the things that it is easy to do is to dismiss a Black man as a theoretician and major thinker. We hope to dispel that this weekend. Major thinker, as a,
So I want to ask you about Stokely Carmichael, whatever he calls himself these days. Kwame Ture. Ennis, of course. Winston was very critical of these men and what they stood for. Will you please explain the basis of that criticism?
Yeah, this is really something. When you read his books, his books are like critiques of prevailing theories. Many of them, or most of them, contribute more to disunity than to unity. As you heard him speak, nobody can be free unless everybody gets free. So there has to be unity, the fight for unity. Like if Winston were around today, and I guess we could take the logic of his thinking, there's no way in the world, from a revolutionary point of view, that we could support the 1619 Project, or settler colonialism, or the LGBTQ movement as the vanguard of social progress. We just couldn't do it, because each of them, knowingly or not, promotes a strategic and tactical position of disunity. And so you get Roy Ennis, who was the head of CORE. Roy Ennis, by the way, the Congress of Racial Equality was one of the leading organizations in the civil rights movement. It was headed by, at the time of the civil rights movement, a man by the name of James Farmer, a really dedicated fighter for civil rights. But then, in the post-civil rights movement, that is after the passage of the civil rights laws, then it is a coup d'etat. It's taken over by this group of right-wing cultural nationalists. And they're going to use the brand and the cultural and political capital of the Congress of Racial Equality to fight for the opposite of what CORE fought for. So Winston attacks and critiques, I should say, the ideas of Roy Ennis in the same way almost that Du Bois attacks the ideology of Marcus Garvey. You see what I'm saying? This separatism. Now, if somebody's going to say, well, Black people constitute a nation within a nation. True that. But we constitute also a decisive part of the working class. So what do? Because we are an oppressed nationality, do you use that to separate us from the working class? Well, what does that do? That means that the Black petty bourgeoisie becomes dominant over radical ideology. We see it all around us. All we have to do, go down the street here to Temple University. Afrocentricity. Get rid of Dr. Montero because, as, if you don't mind me saying, Malefe Asante asserted that I was not a scholar, I was nothing but a communist apparatchik. His language. Now he should be ashamed, I mean, up to the heavens for using, no, but he's not, of course. But you see how the ideology of separatism and really the ideology of non-struggle is such that it cannot tolerate in its presence anything or any person that would advocate a theory of struggle, of unity. I could say more about that, but you know, and yeah, well, the anti-communist piece. Well, what is anti-communism? If not, and this is what Winston said very brilliantly, anti-communism is a form of anti-democracy. You can't claim to be a fighter for democracy and also be anti-communist. And you don't have to be a member of a communist party to fight against anti-communism. Some of the best fighters in this country against anti-communism have not been members of the Communist Party. And I could begin to name them, including the pastor of this church, Lorenzo Shepherd, another minister in West Philadelphia. You know, when Angela Davis got out of prison, Reverend Shepherd opened the doors of his church. The doors of this church were open to Angela Davis and others, even up to this day. The fact that the Saturday Free School could conduct conferences and symposium about a communist or about the Communist Party of China and be welcomed, this represents a high level of democratic consciousness among African Americans and African American institutions. And you know, it's just, they're not words that I have to express my gratitude to this church. There are very few places in this city outside of the Black churches and 1199C of the Hospital Workers Union that you could go and be welcome to discuss things like this. And the Saturday Free School is, for those who don't understand, the Saturday Free School is not a communist party by any, although this is a question that's come up lately. It really has. I mean, you could ask Serafina. Yeah. No, okay. But you get the point, yeah. Oh yeah, well, let's open it up to the, go to the microphone there.
So I just want to give your remarks about Winston. He was a threat. I don't want to say cheaply a threat, but his health and everything. Just some remarks about that and taking advantage of that. He was, this strategic captain.
Don't go nowhere. But what you saw were human qualities that constitute leadership qualities. What you saw was a seasoned fighter for freedom who was also a leader. That's what leadership looks like. I mean, for people who have never seen leadership, that's what it looks like. That's the way it conducts itself. It's humble, it's precise, it's principled. Well, I mean, I don't know whether Does anybody see that around these days? Well, go ahead, Derek.
No,
I'm
I'm just
sorry.
saying, he was that epitome of that threat to systems. Would you say?
I think he was. I think it's that ideological clarity.
Yes.
You know how he said, it's not just the word, it's the deeds, substance of the, that's right. Because, he said that, and that's the way he rolled, that he was very practical, by the way. And a real organizer. In other words, to be the chairman of a communist party, you could sit back and put your feet up on the desk and talk trash all day and night. Another thing is to translate decisions at different bodies of the party or what's going on in the world, to translate that into a practical program, and then to mobilize all of the people within the party, outside of the party, to fight for that. Not by haranguing people. No haranguing, no putting of people down. Have you ever experienced that? He was always a generous man. And he believed that you win people by convincing them.
Okay.
Not by putting them down. And you can see it, just what you saw there.
It was clear.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, it was very clear, but just to reinforce that his life activities moved a lot of things. So anyway, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. You look good, Joe.
So here's the thing. Henry Winston could have been saying those words tonight. That's the thing. When I listened to him talk, it was like he was here and he was just, in the room, and he was commenting on today's politics, today's life. I remember him coming to Philadelphia because there was struggles and issues within the party, and people weren't agreeing. He was a troubleshooter. He was like the shop steward that could come in and get people together to work out the issues and come to an agreement on how we're going to proceed. And the thing that I loved about him the most is that I'm not an intellectual. And, the book reading and all that, that's the hardest part of being a progressive and a socialist to me. And when Henry came to town, he was my kind of person because he spoke common language and, and as I said, he got to the core of the issue. And I'm so glad you said humbleness, because I really don't know anybody as humble as him. One of my dear comrades, lived and worked in New York, and she worked in the party office. She was pregnant at the time, and she would get really, really tired. So she'd go in his office because there was a sofa there, and she'd take a nap. And when she would, nobody would be in there. And when she woke up, he'd be in there, and it'd be dark because he didn't need the lights on. And she just got, so she would talk to him, and I wish I could have gotten her. She's not well enough to come, but she just was able to talk about her problems, her stories, and he shared a lot of his life stories with her. And she just said it was such a really important part of her life to listen to him. And I'm just honored. I'm so glad that the young people are doing this, because it's just so great to learn about someone like this and to see the leadership of someone just so humble and so, his life speaks for everything that he talks about. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about something Dr. Montero and Mrs. Guam brought up earlier, which is the issue of political leadership. Part of the interview that really struck me was the part where Winston talks about, the Red Scare, right? So the communists led the Popular Front against fascism during World War II. And after the war, the non-communist elements, were fearful, whatever, purged them. So I think that hints at something, I don't know, maybe, if communists were just working as anti-fascists, of course, the non-communists wouldn't need the leadership of the communists to do that, right? So I wanted to ask, Doc, you earlier talked about if there were to be a movement, it's not, or it should not be led by the LGBT movement or the woke thing or whatever. I wanted to ask, what do you think? How will it look like? How will a movement look like, or how should it be led?
So that's a great question, and I hope to be able to work with you as we go forward to answer those questions, because in a lot of ways, our movements are severely weakened by the absence of a political and ideological vanguard. And by that, I mean not a dictatorial overseer. I'm talking about a collective of thinkers and activists who can help to give leadership in these various movements. I don't think it's news to anybody that in the absence of an ideological vanguard, the ruling class of the United States has a monumental advantage over us. They shape the discourse, they, invent their own leaders. I mean, if you think the Roy Inneses and all of those that Winston criticizes back in the day, I think it's 100 times worse now. These leaders, and I put quotes around that, who are invented by the class that is oppressing all of us. How do we work our way out of this? This is something that we think about and talk about all the time in the free school. I know when I was working with Michelle and Emily and Alice on the China event, we talked about this all the time. And I know working with Serafina and the others on this one, we talk about it all the time. What is the path out of this difficult situation? Because, social movements are important. I'm not downplaying them, but social movements detach from this fundamental question of class and race oppression that have utter contempt for scientific, by scientific, I mean social scientific analysis, where there is no historical understanding. All of these are real problems for the social movements of this time. And Zayu, I do not have the answer to that. I know aspirationally what I would like to see, but how we get from what is to what should be is a big question. And a lot of ways, it falls upon the shoulders of your generation. Yeah, so I'll just stop there. That's best I could. Thank you for that question.
Well, thank you so much for everything. I think I wanted to thank you for sharing about Lorenzo Shepherd. And is that the same Shepherd from Mount Olivet Baptist Church? Yeah, no, I mean, what you said about him as kind of a fighter against anti-communism. And I know through what I've been reading that Jim Roebuck, who was recently displaced and kicked out of his office by, new progressives who are, they're claiming they want to come in and solve problems, but they're displacing people. And I just wanted to ask a question of the panel. Do you think gentrification is a kind of anti-communism? Because I mean, this is a history to build upon, but yeah.
I'll turn it over to my worthy colleague.
You know, and I've only been doing this for a couple of years. I've only been doing this for a couple of years, and somehow or other I backed into it because I live in West Philly and I saw it happening and happening so fast, even on my own block, which when I moved there in '85 was 100% African American, and now I can count the families on my hand. And what comes with gentrification is an attitude that my neighbors, my new neighbors, tend to display. I'm going to tell you that the last house on my block sold for $550,000. It is a 2-story, 3-bedroom row house. All right, who would pay that kind of money? So what is happening through gentrification and displacement is an assault on the Black community, a definite assault on the Black community, and to also, I think, not just displace that community, but weaken the strength of the Black voice and the Black vote and the Black community. And so we are that community that is not trusted because they cannot necessarily determine what we will do, what we will say, and when we will do it. All right. And so since slavery, we have always been those people who are freedom-loving people who will not be anti-communist. I have been around communists all my life. Every movement I have ever been in was a movement that was staffed by communists, all right? Be it the Peace Council, the Soviet, the US. Soviet and I can go down the apartheid. All right, I can go down the list. Because of our experience with slavery, I think that has given us a special role in terms of promoting world peace, promoting, for the common man and the common woman, which Henry Winston spoke about. We understand that. We have always been an inclusive community, inviting everybody in, but also standing up for the rights of others. And so that makes us more or less a victim of a society that wishes not only to oppress us and displace us, but also get rid of us. And so this is definitely a move against a people who would fight, for a communist movement within this United States and a world communist movement that would also support the liberation of folks struggling for their national freedom.
How do you think Henry Winston advanced King's idea of the need for a revolution of values at home, and I guess the strategy for anti-imperialism to achieve that?
Wow, great question. It's such a wonderful question. King's idea of a radical revolution of values. I think, by the way, you know who Henry Winston's favorite singer was? Ray Charles. He loved Ray Charles, and he loved gospel music and the sorrow songs. So he was a man of the South, really, of the Black South. But and so was King. Martin Luther King was a man of the South, and this idea of a radical revolution of values as almost, and this is very interesting, a precondition for a high level of struggle, but also that a radical revolution of values transforms individuals and groups of people and transforms thereby the conditions of struggle itself. So, Nathan, I would say, indeed, there is commonality there. As I would suggest in a general sense, and this is, I agree with Catherine, there is a commonality between all forces fighting for democracy and peace. A genuine fighter for democracy, be she or he a communist, a democratic radical, or whatever, if that person is a genuine fighter, he or she does not see a division with other. If you're a freedom fighter, you're a freedom fighter. That's what I'm trying to make.
That actually gets to the question that I was going to ask. I think two of the things that stood out to me a lot from the portions of the interview that we were shown were how much Winston talked about democracy itself and fighting to defend democracy and the global fight against fascism. And then the other thing that stood out to me was there's a portion where he talked about the Underground Railroad, the anti-slavery struggle, and how that gave meaning to American patriotism, what it meant to be an American patriot. And I think we're living in a moment in which even the elites, like the voices of the elites, like the mainstream media, are saying there is a crisis of American democracy. And it's a very strange moment, I think. And how do you think Winston would have assessed this particular, that particular question? And this, I think he also talked about, getting to the essence of things, getting to the substance of things. So, how would he have seen, what is the substance of American democracy and what it could be, especially in relation to how the ruling class talks about it, the sort of messages that are thrown around, which are designed to sort of basically confuse the masses of people.
Well, I know very well what you're talking about. See, I think when the ruling elites and their ideologues speak about the crisis of democracy, they're really talking about a crisis of the rule of the ruling elite. That's the crisis that they're talking about. And what their answer to their crisis is to further undermine democracy while calling it defending democracy. I think Winston would see it in those ways because, and I've tried to learn from Winston. I don't know how well I have learned. Sometimes I feel that I haven't learned well enough. I honestly do, because I always think, well, what would Winston say on this? And I think there's some ways that I think that he may not have agreed with, but really I do. But because he's always talking about what he calls the monopoly ruling class, the corporate ruling class. And of course, when we talk, Robert Kagan or these ideologues, we have to understand that they come out of foundations that are financed by corporations, and they speak for the corporate ruling class. And so therefore, when they talk about a crisis of democracy, and I think this is one of the things the Free School has attempted to, state and argue, they're really talking about a crisis of their rule. The people are rejecting their rule, and they're calling it a crisis of democracy. So I think Winston would look at it like that.
Thank you. Yes, so for my question, well, you two have definitely answered it in a wide variety of ways, but to get right to it, Based on your experiences in the struggle, what advice would you give to the up and coming communists and organizers of today? And additionally, what do you think Henry Winston's advice to the youth of today would be?
Yeah, that's the great question. What would Henry Winston's advice be? You know, I have to kind of answer you the way I answer Michelle Liu, because she's always at, or Porterbug, they're always asking me questions, and I can't always answer them, and I have to admit that I don't have always the answer. But I think, you know, because Winston was big on political education, and that the younger generation must take seriously political and ideological education. It cannot be taken afar or taken out of position by those who say, well, you don't need ideology. You don't need political education. That's, we're in the postmodern period, if you don't say. So I think, and I see it, I do see it in the free school. I think Catherine and I agree upon this, the great potential of the younger generation. We see it in microcosm in the free school, in all of the young people and their eagerness to know and to act and to translate knowledge into practice for those who are, you know, in many ways, in that stranded population, unemployed, homeless, hungry, maybe drug addicted. What can we say to them? And I think the closer we get to the working class, the better we'll be. The further we separate ourselves, and this is not, you know, I mean, in other words, let me put it this way. This petty bourgeois, upper middle class, they, to be vital to the struggle, have to be brought closer to the unemployed, to the suffering. They have to stop looking down upon them, canceling them. You know what I'm saying? So I think, I guess what I'm trying to say also is we all need a radical revolution of values to take us from a selfish orientation to a human and humanity orientation. And you know, education and political education raises the level of empathy, of understanding, of people and of suffering. So that's what I would say at this. And we're also talking about the short term and the long term. And so in the short term, there are profound tasks of preparing us for the longer term struggle. That's the way I would answer it. I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Good evening. First, I wanted to thank each of you, everyone in this space, of course. And actually, my question is quite simple. It goes off of something that a few other people have brought up. I'm really concerned about this idea of the US essence, the notion that Winston brings up, and then you sort of brought up as a follow-up as a part of who he was and his legacy and everything, and how that synthesis can be brought to the forefront with an understanding. Because in reading Du Bois, it seems critical to me to come to a definition of what is that human essence that the US brings to the world, so that we can redefine and get back to essentially, you know, in my head, I think about it Native American wise, because I myself was Native American wise. I stutter because I have anxiety, but Native American wise, because I myself are Native American and Native American. So that US essence, the essence of America, I'm interested first in your experience and truly, very, very interested. And then also what potential, not an actual definition, but what is a potential way of parsing a definition to bring that to the world.
I don't have the experience that you're also mentioning, but I think that's also why we're going to this thing of the blues. And I just wanted to bring that up. I guess. No, I mean, it's the whole thing about what you're already saying about suffering. And to be able to connect, with other human beings. But again, with what you guys are saying, like how Winston goes back to this chattel slavery, Du Bois goes back to that, Black Reconstruction. What that also created, I guess, for the question of American democracy, in the way I see it is like, the freedom struggle of King goes back to the slave struggle with Frederick Douglass. And that's connected by Du Bois. And so that's another point. But I think the blues is where I would start with that question of the American essence.
Wow. Well, now I want to start asking you questions. I really do. I mean, yeah, I agree so much with what you say. The question is, what is America? That poem by Langston Hughes, what is America to me? And one of the great contributions of the African American artistic and literary and scientific contributions is to discover that essence. And I agree so much with what Serafina just said. In fact, I feel that the blues has a lot to teach us about the American essence. But we were also talking about that as informing the revolutionary process. I'm so happy that we can talk about that here, a revolutionary process, the need for a revolutionary movement. But to have that, you have to have a knowledge of the substance of the reality that you're dealing with. Who are the American people? See, this is where this canceling of people and really the putting down of the entire white working class, that's a chilling thought, in these days. To just, throw away over 100 million people because they don't use the right pronouns or have a difference of opinion about certain things from you, and to say they are backward. If I might give just a little story, I have to say this. I have a good friend who's a really prolific historian. I won't mention his name now unless you ask me. But he has written a book. Well, the book has been out about 7 years now, called The Counter-Revolution of 1776. And it is a foundation for the 1619 project. And what he argues in a recent article is that it is HBO, the people running Twitter, and the big corporations who are now, quote, woke and anti-racist, quote, unquote, that represent the most important allies of the Black struggle. I cannot imagine a more grotesque thing to think about. And I know the brother would go back to the Communist Party. I'm trying to say, what happened, money? how could you end up in the arms of the 1%, the 1/10 of 1%? But I think it is a failure to understand, I think what Serafina's getting at, what we're trying to do in this symposium. What is the substance of America's reality? And does that substance predispose towards a revolutionary and democratic struggle? Or are the American people and the substance of America such that we are predisposed to the opposite of democracy? And if that is the case, we should all fold up our tents, stop having preschool, and just go and play video games or go to Kensington and get some dope. You understand where I'm coming from? I mean, what do you do with that pessimistic outlook? And what Henry Winston was saying is that the American people can transform this country and transform themselves. And he said a lot of what happens is dependent upon leadership. The people without leadership have a difficulty fighting for their rights, fighting for unity. And if you feel where I'm coming from, I think, and I agree with Serafina so very much about the blues. And we're going to talk about this on Sunday, and we want to talk about Afro-pessimism and Afro-futurism and Afrocentrism, all this Afro stuff, but no anti-imperialism, no fight for peace, no fight for democracy. So yeah, that's what I would say. Forgive me for going on too long. Thank you so much. From Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City in the house.
I've been thinking about something Winston says in the interview, which is that human nature is class conditioned. I've been thinking about that, what it means. I was hoping you could go a little bit further into that, because it's not as simple as saying that a person cannot transcend their class condition, because he's proof that one can. But what I've been thinking about is that as class divide increases, something that we are seeing today, it becomes difficult for one section of people to understand another section of people at a human level, which is, I mean, it sort of precludes the possibility for unity that we need. So I was just thinking if you could comment on it.
Yes. You know, when I heard that, I thought about Manasvi, because she's studying linguistics, and language is almost a class determinative phenomenon. But and I know, Portable, you being from India and the tradition of caste and class and other divisions, and people, and especially when the British came in to restructure Indian society, claiming that they're doing it on the basis of what is human nature for certain groups. And what Winston was trying to do is cut through, on the one side, the white supremacist argument that, well, it's only human nature for groups to want to be with their own, just thus upholding the system of racial segregation and racial inequality. The other side of it is a kind of Afrocentrism, or Afro-pessimism, Afro-futurism, that Black folk are so different at the level of their human essence as to make class unity and democratic people's unity impossible. And you know, I've heard it so much. I've had it thrown at me. Well, how are you going to unite with these white people? Look at what they're doing. You know, I was in an argument today, not an argument, discussion. I mean, you can hear this formulation in almost every discussion with people who do not have a deeper understanding of the nature of the real divisions in this society. And what Winston is saying, and he was making, and this is what King was saying too, that the working class, you can't take it as a static phenomenon. It can be transformed and is being transformed. You know, I listened to Tucker Carlson on Fox News, probably the most intelligent commentator on cable news. But he's not right on a lot of things, on most things. For example, he rails against the claim by the liberal establishment that the nation is racist and we liberal elites are waking it up. We're woke and so on and so forth. Now, he calls himself defending the white working class. And what they'll say it openly. This is not a racist country. How could we be a racist country and elect Barack Obama? I could give you 100 answers to that, but well, how could you have Kamala Harris if we're a racist country? So my argument is, and I think this is the case, that the nation is not as racist as it once was. But that does not mean it is a non-racist nation, because racism is filtered down from a class that needs it ideologically. And so to say that it is not yet where it should be is not to say that it's where it was. Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement and Muhammad Ali, and I would even go so far as to say Marvin Gaye and Aretha Franklin and Ray Charles and the blues has transformed the American political cultural landscape. This is not the nation it was. White America is not what it once was, but it is not what it must become. Black folk are not what we once were. I think what we once were a few decades ago is preferable to a lot of what we are right now. But, yeah, really, I mean, but we are not where we must be. The nation is not where it was, but we're not where we must be. So if you get like people like Tucker Carlson, this nativist, how can you say this is a racist nation? Well, I can tell you how I can say it's a racist nation, and I will start with the institutions controlled by the ruling class. But see, Tucker don't want to go there, and so be it. But yeah, that's all I would say. What is and what must become, and what can become. And you know, I know in my conversations with Serafina, we talk so much about the potentiality of what exists at this time. Wow, it's after 9 o'clock. Well, I guess we're supposed to be out of here at 9 o'clock. No, 9. Yeah, well, yeah, there's some housekeeping details that we will take take care. But anyway, thank you all very, very much. This was done. So, I hope everybody comes back tomorrow. We will be serving lunch, but it's going to be, you know, baked chicken, macaroni and cheese. I mean, we're going to do it up. And, but the discussion will be very, very important. So I'll turn it over to Serafina. My worthy colleague says she doesn't have anything to say. We start at 10 a.m. tomorrow, so try to be on time.